Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast, and my name is Naz. Let's talk about Canelo versus Billy Joe. Isn't it crazy to see that amount of fans in one arena? It's been a very long time since we've seen something like that in combat sports or in any sporting event in general, especially in the US. Canelo and Billy Joe Saunders put on a show, spectacular event, broke the highest attendance rating in the US with over 73,000 people. That's behind two of AJ's fights that happened in the UK. There have been higher attendance records, but those were for outdoor arenas. This is in the indoor arena, which is the Dallas Cowboys Stadium. It was just an incredible night. The way that boxing shows the fighters' entrance, the fireworks, this is all something missing from mixed martial arts. And when you got a big boxing fight like the one that we had, it just has this extra special feeling. It might be because of the full capacity crowd. UFC and MMA doesn't really do stadium shows, especially the UFC. They only do it when they go overseas and maybe Australia. We've seen some Japanese organizations do some packed arenas, but nothing like boxing. I remember when AJ fought Klitschko in the packed arena in Wembley Stadium. It was just incredible. And what we saw last night with Canelo Alvarez amping up the crowd, the way the pop when Canelo walked into the arena was just amazing. Boxing's number one superstar. It might be a tie between him and AJ. But for someone as confident and someone on such a roll like Canelo Alvarez is, you might have to give him the nod. What an incredible fight. And for Billy Joe Saunders to come in and do what he does, asking for a bigger ring, bothering Canelo. This is the most bothered I think I've seen Canelo in some time. And when I say Canelo was bothered, he still looked like he was stone-faced and wasn't affected by most people's. You know, this fight, it showed, and let's just talk about actually my thoughts before the actual fight starts. Now, before the fight actually starts, my thought was Billy Joe Saunders was going to be one of the biggest tests for Canelo Alvarez. Just the tenacity that he has, just the mental fortitude that Billy Joe Saunders has. And we'll talk about it later. Some people thought that he might have ended the fight early. He might have just quit on the stool, but there might have been some other reasons for that. We'll get into that later. But I thought that this would be one of the toughest tests for Canelo Alvarez. Canelo even said it himself, and eerily enough, he stopped him in and around the rounds that he thought he would. That's how much he was dialed in for this fight. But Canelo Alvarez said himself and his trainer that they're going to have to take some time and dissect Billy Joe Saunders. And that's exactly what he did in this fight. He took a couple rounds, dissected Billy Joe Saunders. And I think those first couple rounds might have gone to Billy Joe, and the latter rounds, you know, when the fight was actually ended. But I think Billy Joe got a couple rounds, which was surprising to some people. But I think if you were in the know and you knew Billy Joe Saunders and the crew that he trains with, especially with the Gypsy King, and, you know, being with that crew, Billy Joe Saunders was going to be a problem. Now, we all knew that he didn't have the devastating knockout power, but, and this was shown in some of the statistics, and the commentators even talked about this, but most of Billy Joe Saunders' shots are jabs. But he does have that devastating left uppercut that was talked about a couple times. But when you're fighting Canelo Alvarez, the tricky part is that he's such a devastating counterpuncher and such a devastating puncher in general that if you give him any openings and hit any power shots or expose yourself in any way, Canelo Alvarez will take advantage of that. Even though he's coming from a lighter weight division and moving up, he still has that power, still has those spectacular shots. At the beginning of the fight, he was putting in that insurance, putting that money in the bank, and hitting Billy Joe Saunders with the body shots. And really reading what Billy Joe had in his arsenal. We know that Billy Joe Saunders has a lot of tactics and tools that he could have used, but the activity level that he was showing in some points of the fight, I think, caused a problem to Canelo. But the difference maker for Canelo Alvarez is the adjustments that he makes. We've seen this in a lot of the great boxers of any era, but Canelo Alvarez is one of the best at doing it. You know, being in the middle of a fight and him and his coach figuring out what the best game plan is to unlock the victory, if you will. I think that's what Canelo Alvarez does best. Is he can watch as much tape as he wants. He can study his opponent as much as he wants. But once he gets in there and his opponent might be doing something different, or it just might look different in the ring, Canelo Alvarez is the best at just adjusting and making those subtle changes in his game to get the victory. Now, after this fight, Canelo Alvarez called out Caleb Plant, and this was in the interview after the fight. He says that he wants to unify all the belts in that division. A lot of people like that fight, but if we look back at Caleb Plant's last fight, it wasn't the best way for Caleb Plant to show everybody that he could beat Canelo Alvarez. And he didn't look like he would have caused much problems for Canelo Alvarez, especially the Canelo Alvarez that we just saw. The power is still translating for Canelo. The fight IQ is still there for him. And especially with that giant packed crowd that we saw in that stadium, Canelo Alvarez did not wilt in the moment, which I thought was especially special, if you will, about Canelo Alvarez. He thrived in that moment. It looked like he's been there. It looked like he belonged there, to be honest with you. Canelo Alvarez just looked like someone special in front of that packed arena. And Billy Joe Saunders might have felt like he was in that moment, might have felt that he was made for that moment. But I think once he made that walkout and Canelo made his walkout, which was especially long compared to Billy Joe's, I think he might have felt the friction of the moment. He might have felt all of those people staring at him, most of them wanting him to lose. And I think the moment might have got to him a little bit. But then he went on, and like I said before, I think he won a couple of those rounds. So after Canelo Alvarez calls out Caleb Plant to unify all the belts, he was asked after the fight, and a lot of people were talking about this after the fight, but a lot of people want him to fight Triple G. Now, him and Triple G have had a couple fights, as you all must know. Some people thought that Canelo Alvarez might have lost one of them, but he got the decision win. Triple G is a devastating fighter, but will it be any different? Does he deserve that fight? I think these are all questions that need to be asked. Canelo Alvarez has no problem fighting him. After leaving his last promotion, Golden Boy Promotions, he's talked about this in a number of interviews now, but the freedom that he feels to fight as much as he wants is just perfect for him. It's opening up a lot of doors for him because now he can fight as much as he wants. Like the last time he fought was maybe a couple months ago, very active, especially for the superstar that he is. And now he's talking about coming back in September. A lot of other people were asked who he should fight. It looks like the promotion, Matchroom Boxing, wants to go for that Caleb Plant fight. Canelo is on this roll at the moment because he talks about this as well. He's training so often. He's training so much. Why wouldn't he fight at the pace that he's fighting at? That's his reasoning going into this. Now, I want to go back to this Billy Joe Saunders fight. Let's get to the tail end of that one. Billy Joe Saunders, I think he did a lot better than a lot of people thought that he would, especially when casual fans look at this. They think that he might have just got trucked. But I think that he did a lot better than people thought he would. He showed that tenacity. And unfortunately, he had to quit on the stool. He had to retire, excuse me. Now, he got hit by a devastating shot that speculations and things are coming out that Billy Joe Saunders has a broken orbital. Now, he got sent to the hospital right after the fight. After the fight, you could see swelling in Billy Joe Saunders' eye. It looked very bad. It didn't look like he could see out of it at all. But then I think the moment that cemented it for me that this is no joke is when he was walking to the ambulance and you could see him and half of his face was almost turning purple. Now, this was from a further angle. Maybe we couldn't see it properly, but it didn't look good at all. It did not look good. Billy Joe Saunders, he's a true warrior. We talked about this before the fight even started. A lot of people were coming out with speculations that Billy Joe Saunders, with the mental vault that he has, was going to be able to stay in front of Canelo Alvarez unless he got knocked unconscious. But people didn't see this one coming. People did not see this one coming. I'll be honest with you. I looked down for a moment. I look up and the fight's over. And I was very surprised in the moment. A lot of people were booing. But Billy Joe Saunders is not the type of person that's just going to sit on the stool like that and give up. This is the biggest moment of his career. There's got to be something majorly wrong for him to just end the fight like that. Canelo Alvarez is just something special, especially when you think about that he's coming from a lighter weight class against bigger guys. Billy Joe looked around the same size as Canelo Alvarez, but he is was the champion of that weight division. Now, Canelo Alvarez is like, we're just witnessing greatness at this moment with Canelo Alvarez. I think this is something special. This is something amazing. We'll see what happens next with Billy Joe. But in some people's opinion, this could have been the best thing that could have happened to him, where he showed his tenacity. He showed some of the great things that he could do, the amazing fundamentals of boxing that he had, and sticking and moving around Canelo Alvarez and winning some rounds in some people's opinions. The judges' scorecards showed that it was a very close fight, but all of them had Canelo winning the fight. And it looked like Canelo was just about to step on the gas at that moment. He was egging on the crowd, which is something crazy to see. Canelo Alvarez commanding over 73,000 people like that in that stadium against Billy Joe Saunders. So that was something special to see. I think boxing always has these amazing fights sometimes, especially these stadium events. They're crazy with the fireworks and the music and all this kind of stuff. This is true boxing. I was thinking about this as well. We've been seeing a lot of this YouTube boxing stuff come out in the news, especially with this Logan Paul, Floyd Mayweather, Jake Paul incident, with Jake Paul knocking out Ben Askren. It's amazing to see two boxers at the highest level, no matter if Canelo Alvarez is the best of the best, but it's amazing to see two boxers at the highest level do what they do best and see true boxing. And I think it's great to see. I think it just reminds us how amazing this sport is, especially with these YouTubers and stuff coming in. But I think it was a great event, amazing event, well done, especially during this time. Let's talk about this for a second before we end this podcast. For this time, we touched upon it at the beginning of the podcast, but it's crazy to see that amount of fans in one arena, especially if you're outside of Texas or Florida, where they're having these events in the US. It's crazy to see, especially when they pan over all of the fans and, more than half of them aren't wearing masks. They're just hanging out, watching fights. It kind of puts us in the right direction, if you will. We'll see the aftermath of this fight. To be honest with you, we might or might not, now that I think about it, most of these events, like the UFC event, some of the boxing event, I don't hear any numbers coming out of it on it. I don't think they want to push any numbers. I was just watching an interview, it was a post-fight breakdown by the Morning Combat crew, and Brian Campbell was explaining that there was an exposure that happened for that crew while they were covering the Bellator event. And small things like that, I think they're kind of getting lost and we're not hearing about it. I'd love to know more, but it's up to the promoter. It's up to the state commission if they want to put out news like that. But anyways, I think it was a good event. It was a great event, actually. It's nice to see it put a stamp on this. And Canelo Alvarez, again, being the best of the best at the moment. So thank you for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate it. If you could like, subscribe, hit the bell notification on YouTube and all that good stuff, that'd be amazing. If you can listen to the podcast on the different podcast networks like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, like, review, all that good stuff, it helps the podcast grow. I really appreciate it. And thank you again for taking the time out of your day to listen to me talk about this spectacular event. So thank you again. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz.